welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at gods5minutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. Luke 11:1 reads, "And it came to pass that as he was praying in a certain place, when he ceased, one of his disciples said unto him, Lord, teach us to pray, as John also taught his disciples." It is simply a fact that we owe most of our knowledge of Jesus' prayers to the Gospel of Luke. While the others write of a few instances of his most important prayers, the bulk of our record of them is Luke's. That is fitting, for while the primary burden of the book of Luke is to establish that Jesus was the Messiah, the principal focus of his doing so was on Jesus' manhood. He it was who spoke of the child Jesus, who recorded his growth in stature and wisdom, as well as the tenderness and compassion and the universal nature of his work. But the focus on Jesus' manhood naturally called for descriptions of the most precious indication of his humanity, which was his habitual prayerfulness. More than any other single thing, it is Jesus' prayers that bring him near to us as a fellow sojourner through the ups and downs of life. We thank God for the story of his weariness as he sat on the coping of the well of Sychar, for the one of his falling asleep, exhausted on the hard wooden structure in the stern of a fishing boat, among the nets and litter. It brings him near when we read that he thirsted, nearer still when the potent words fall on our ears, Jesus wept. But precious as these indications of his true participation in physical needs and emotions are, the great evidence of his prayers rises to a higher plane. They show us that he too lived a life of dependence, communion, and submission, so that in our religious life, as well in all other parts of life, he is our example and our leader. Through his prayers, he proved what we taught, that he is truly not ashamed to call us brethren, so much less than him though we be. He showed us by his life, and surely most of all by his prayers, that he lived a life of faith. The Lord showed us by his devotions that even the highest, holiest life needs a regular pattern of having prayer. The hour of prayer, the secret place, the spoken words are the channel for the flow of heavenly graces that alone can sustain us in the spirit of holiness and kindness past the propensities of our own carnal impulses and the pervading influences of the world about us. Jesus' life was all one long prayer, but even so, it needed the mountaintop and the nightly converse with God. There are lessons to be learned from the pattern of his prayers. For instance, he used it as a means of rest after service. Mark tells us of the Lord's work on the first Sabbath day of his ministry at Capernaum. First, we find him teaching in the synagogue, without a break, healing a man of an unclean spirit, then straight to Simon's house, where he confronts the case of his mother's wife being sick with fever. He healed her. Then, as soon as the Sabbath ended, we can visualize Peter's house besieged by a crowd full of sorrow and sickness, lying all about the door, eager for a glimpse of a master. He could not keep it shut any more than he could his heart or his hand, and soon their troubles were transferred from their shoulders to his. And what was his refreshment? An all too brief slumber. Then, as Mark says, rising up a great while before day, he was off to a solitary place, there to pour out his great heart in prayer. Another way in which the Lord used prayer was as preparation for important steps. When it was time to call those who were to be his apostles, Luke tells us, he went out on a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. Then, when it was day, he called to him his disciples and chose the 12. Likewise, we read how he drew forth Peter's great confession after lengthy prayer and used it as a foundation for bestowing large spiritual powers. In just that very same way, we may bring our plans and purposes to God's throne and test them by praying about them. He too is our leader, our guide. He too looks down from heaven where he is now to consider our prayers and to bless us in the same manner in which he desired blessing from his Father. Have you talked to him today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at godsfiveminutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.